Hi everybody, so have you ever wondered, should you be trading to failure? You probably have wondered that. I have, I think everybody has. So stay tuned and you'll get my thoughts. All right, hi everybody, John Meadows here, and today we're talking about going to failure and should you be going to failure or not. Now I'm going to assume that your goal is to get bigger muscles, that you're trying to grow, okay? So with that in mind, the first question you should ask yourself is, well, what creates muscle growth in the first place? And a large amount of the growth is driven by two things. It's driven by activation and mechanical loading on the muscle fibers. Now, one of the ways I can answer your question is by asking you a question. Are you using heavier loads or lighter loads or medium loads? Because that is going to play into whether you go to failure or not, in my opinion. Now, the rule I use is about 85% or more I consider that a heavy load. And here's why that's important. Remember just a few seconds ago when I said activation is key and then loading on the muscle fiber? If you're using, say, around that 85% range of your 1 rep maximum on a set, you're already getting maximum activation. Okay? There is a rule. It's called Henneman's size principle. Okay? And you have, so if you haven't heard the word or if you're not really sure what it means, motor unit. A motor unit is just a motor neuron and its innervation to muscle fibers. So you have these, just think of your nervous system, you have these units of muscle fibers that are controlled by a nerve. Now, the ones, when you're training lighter, what you generally activate are the smaller the smaller motor units. But as you use heavier weight, you start to use these things. Here's another word you probably hear a lot, high threshold motor units. All that means is the motor units that are bigger, they can produce more force, because what happens when you use a heavier weight, you need to produce more force to move the weight. The reason why I'm telling you this motor unit stuff is because when you use that 85%-ish load, all those are activated. So you are using your high threshold motor units. So you're using the smaller ones all the way up to the higher threshold ones. So you're getting very good activation from all your muscle fibers. And since the weight is heavier, you're getting that mechanical loading on the muscle fibers. Now, in terms of repetitions, you're probably looking at like anywhere from 5, 6, 7, 8 reps, like 5 to 8. If the bar is moving real fast, you don't have enough loading on the muscle fibers. What happens is you need a little bit of time, because you have these things called actin, myosin. It's a process where this actin and myosin locks, and it happens when you're using heavier weight and you're moving the bar slow. Not intentionally slow, but just because it's so heavy. I don't want to get into all the nuts and bolts on that, but the reason why I'm telling you that is because that actin myosin binding is another kind of process that happens when your muscles are growing, and it only happens when you're using a heavier load and the bar's not flying up. So you need a little bit of time. Okay, you need a little bit of time. So a fast set of 5 doesn't give you enough time, but a heavier set of 5, now you got more of that binding, more of that tension on the muscle fiber. So back to my original question, do you need to go to failure? Well, you've already got all the activation, all the muscle fibers, and you're loading them with a heavy weight, and the bar's not moving too fast. So you're getting that actin myosin binding. Those are very key elements for muscle growth. So if you're using your heavier weights, in my opinion, you do not need to go to failure. And you'll see where I build programs when I'm using a compound movement, the majority of the sets aren't to failure. It's working up to the last set, which I do take to failure, the last set, but it's with good form. So I'm not getting sloppy in an ugly rep trying to get that last rep. It's a good, strong set of 5, 6, 7 reps, but the bar's not flying. I'm trying to move the bar as fast as I can, but it's not flying. That's simply because the weight is so heavy. Okay, so now we've talked a little bit about the heavier weights. So what about if you're using something like 60 to 85%, say, of your 1 rep max? Do you need to go to failure? Well, okay, so think about what I just said about activation. Now you're using a lighter weight, so now those high threshold motor units aren't immediately engaged. So you're using more of those smaller motor units. the lower threshold motor units. So now you've got to think a little bit differently in terms of going to failure. And just the simple answer is you're going to need more sets to failure if you're using the lighter load. Do you need a lot of sets to failure? I still don't think you need a lot, but here's what I think you do need. You need a set where what happens as you're training, you're going through the set, if it's a kind of a moderate range, your muscle fibers are going to start to fatigue. And when they start to fatigue, they'll call upon other muscle fibers to help. Because you're not stopping. You're going to keep, that 8th rep was hard, but you want 15 reps. So some of the fibers are fatiguing. You've got lactate. You got all these things building up. So other muscle fibers are being called on to help, and then they fatigue, and then you need more muscle fibers called on to help. So think logically. Just think logically. In order for me to get all my muscle fibers engaged and working hard, now with that moderate load, I'm going to have to get closer to failure. I still say you're not going to need all your sets to failure, but I would include one set where you go to absolute complete failure with the moderate load, because I think you need to do that to, again, activate everything and make sure you have enough loading on the muscle fibers. Now, what if there's all this talk about, well, you can grow just as good now with really light loads as compared to heavy loads. So now let's say you're talking about 30, 40% of your 1 rep max, 20% maybe. Now, in my opinion, you have to go to failure. The load is so light, you get virtually no mechanical loading on the fibers. You can actually move the bar so fast, the velocity is super high, so you get none of that actin myosin binding, at least to the level to cause any appreciable growth. So now it becomes very important that you fatigue every fiber, and the only way you can do that is doing lots and lots and lots and lots of reps, because again, you're getting very little loading on the fiber. The weight is just too light. The bar is moving too fast. So look at it that way. I want you to think about the load that you're using. When you ask yourself, do I need to go to failure? The lighter the load, the more you need to go to failure. The heavier the load, the less you need to go to failure. That's the rule. That's the kind of the principle I want you to have in your mind when you try to determine if you're going to go to failure or not. Now, I do want to add another thing. If you've watched my other videos where we were doing more of the athletic style training, the French contrast work, where we had some plyometrics and stuff like that, you'll notice that we didn't go to failure on any of our sets. And that was very intentional. As an athlete, not a bodybuilder, but as an athlete, if your goal is to jump higher, to be more explosive, if you play football, you need to be in a position where you can generate force very rapidly. So in those cases, that lower weight with really high velocity that I was telling you about, the lighter load that moves faster, is very, very good for an athlete, because it's teaching your body how to generate force really fast. But it's not going to be optimal for growing and getting big muscles. All right, but there is applications for an athlete where I'd say athletes don't even really need to go to failure, because they just need to produce force over and over, and then they need to produce force when they're in a fatigued state, and that's what you saw with those other videos. So it's a little different depending on what you're looking for. The other thing with athletes is if you're going to failure and using heavier loads and going to failure, you create more muscle damage, and what happens? They need more rest. And as an athlete, you need to practice your skill over and over and over. And if you're always beat up and you're always sore, then you're going to negatively impact your ability to practice or to train. And you can't have that as an athlete. So anyways, I hope that kind of clears it up and gives you like a little bit of background, a little bit of the science, kind of the surface level of it. We can get into it deeper on another video, but hopefully that gives you a little bit more of an idea of when you actually need to go to failure and when you don't. So if you're using those heavier loads, don't tell yourself, I got to take them all to failure. And if you're using those lighter loads, don't just do 10 reps and just stop, because it's probably not going to do you any good. So I appreciate you watching. Thanks a bunch. Hope you like this video. And if you already haven't, please subscribe and share it. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.